correspondence? Justin?
What? Oh, yeah.
Go. Solid. Time starts. When a gate resolved, the United States should promote the development of market rate housing in urban neighborhoods. Our sole contention is destroying the market. The implementation of market rate housing, where housing has no rent restrictions and is not restricted by affordable housing laws, creates crises that destroy access to housing in 3 unique ways. The first is cutting subsidized housing. Pinto of American Enterprise Institute underscores that in the status quo, the main way Congress would promote the development of market rate housing is to cut funding for subsidized housing infrastructure or risk urban sprawl. This means that the local housing authorities ease up on the properties that are under rent control and more conservative with their assistance programs. Rice 09 tells us that these programs help lift 4 million families out of poverty, free up financial resources, and promote home stability. However, continuing to cut these would put 5 million families nationwide on the brink of homelessness. Second is gentrification. Clause 18 explains that gentrification is the process of money reshaping cities, meaning that encroachment by the rich to the poor neighborhoods forces the less fortunate away from the inner city. This is problematic, as Chu 18 writes, that market rate housing development increases displacement and gentrification. He explains that ripple effect on surrounding neighborhoods, driving up rent and increasing burdens on low-income households. Market rate housing is linked to the mass displacement of low-income residents and operates through indirect and exclusionary means such as price shadowing. A study found that in neighborhoods with an influx of higher-income residents, working-class residents moved at 3 times the rate compared to other areas. And gentrification leads to a laundry list of issues. National Center for Environmental Health 09 tells you that several factors create disparities in communities' health. Examples such as socioeconomic status, land use, the built environment, race and ethnicity, and environmental injustice. Displacement has many health implications that contribute to disparities among special populations, including the poor, women, children, the elderly, and members of racial and ethnic minority groups. Studies indicate that vulnerable populations typically have shorter life expectancies, which include higher cancer rates, more birth defects, greater infant mortality, and higher incidence of asthma, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. In addition, increasing evidence shows that these populations have an unequal share of residential exposure to hazardous substances. Other health effects include limited access to affordable, healthy housing, healthy food choices, transportation choices, and quality schools. All of this is because of gentrification. Third is lack of workforce. Parker 18 indicates that the most pressing problem in the housing market is currently the lack of construction workers to the lack of housing being built. Reuters 16 corroborates that from 2014 and 2016, the amount of unfilled jobs in the home building industry skyrocketed 81%, with Parker concluding that 80% of construction companies are having a hard time filling up construction workforce. Wellborn 18 concludes that since 2015, because of the labor shortage, the amount of new house contracts that have been able to be completed has fallen by 42%. Unfortunately, this raises prices. Season 18 reports how housing prices have jumped 23.6% since 2004 due to a minuscule workforce. The warrant is given by Reuters 16, who explains that companies must hike wages and must hand out on-the-spot raises to incentivize workers to stay at their company. The end result is a massive price increase in a house that would have ordinarily been much cheaper for developers hike prices in order to maintain their profit margin. Fortunately, Thorsby 18 reports how this problem will self-correct as prices will slow their growth due to the decline in active buyers in the status quo. Problematically, affirming reverses this trend, as when you try to force more housing projects without letting the workforce catch up, prices are forced to rise exponentially as companies either go bankrupt or charge sky-high prices. Fortune 16 furthers that this will shut entry-level home buyers out of the market, ensuring that the new generation will never be able to afford homes. Overall, Hive 18 concludes that the labor shortage in America is causing supply to be limited and housing prices to raise. For these reasons and more, please debate.
Good?
1 second. All right, ready?
I am also ready.
Sonia and I firm resolved the United States should promote market rate housing in urban areas. The United States is facing a shortage of housing unlike any else. Business Insider tells us that the housing market is extremely tight with rising demand and limited supply. The rent controls in place have good intentions, but they just have not worked. Landowners are drastically increasing prices of housing in order to maximize on profits. For this reason, many cities such as New York City reached an all-time high record of homelessness, the Coalition for Homelessness tells us in 2018. Forbes explains that the problem is only getting progressively worse. Housing prices are rising as the shortage continues to grow and the demand. Thus, for the sake of making housing more affordable for the lower income families, our first contention is increasing the supply of housing. The Huffington Post finds that America's housing crisis is, quote, a ticking time bomb, and furthers that although the U.S. population has been growing steadily, there have been fewer homes on the market than in any year since 1982. Cato 2017 tells us that by having restrictions such as rent controls and zoning laws in the status quo, it limits the amount of space that developers can build on, which cuts off any potential increase in supply. However, affirming entails a deregulation of the current rent control laws. In a world with market rate housing, builders are then free to build more housing on the open land. This drastically increases the supply of housing in urban areas and meets supply with demand, driving down the prices. Badger 16 writes you, market rate housing decreases the overall cost of housing by increasing the supply to meet the demand. He also continues that the lack of construction rates has led to a decrease of affordable housing. This has been seen in California, a state with some of the most expensive living areas in the U.S., that low-income neighborhoods with more construction witness about half the displacement of similar neighborhoods that haven't added as much new housing. However, because the market rate housing solves for this by allowing developers to build more land through deregulation, the impacts are twofold. First is increasing housing for the low-income families and solving for the housing crisis in America. When the potential for houses to be built exists, landowners will aim to build housing for the lower end. This is because there is a surplus of luxury homes right now. Thus, because obviously supply is not the issue when it comes to luxury housing, they will cater to a new market with just as high of a demand, but with not as much supply, low-income housing. In fact, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition tells us America needs 7.7 million units of low-income housing. Because there is a surplus of luxury homes, once market rate is promoted, developers would seek to earn profit by building lower-class homes. Secondly, an increase in supply allows for the decrease of prices in existing homes. If there's an increase in the supply of houses, prices tend to fall to a lower equilibrium price. CNBC in May 2018 states that the prices of houses have made the biggest jump in 4 years. They further this by telling us that low supply and high demand of houses is the reason for the increase of these prices, and that the high rise of prices is exacerbating the already critical low supply. California Senator Scott Wiener tells us that increasing market rate housing is key to increasing the overall housing of supply, thus decreasing the price. But the shortage of houses in these cities also hikes up the general prices of houses because landowners always want to maximize on their profit margins. However, once we promote the development of market rate housing, we increase the amount of houses on the market that are available at lower costs. The impact is clear. A general overall decrease in prices opens up the housing market to lower classes. The U.S. Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development tells us in 2017 that there were around 544,000 homeless people in the United States. The New York Times furthers this by telling us that about 1.6 million households are considered to be living in worse scenarios, living with low wages and spending more than half of their income on housing. However, once you affirm, you decrease the amount of people who are homeless, leading to lower poverty rates and fewer deaths. In order to take a step into breaking the cycle of poverty for Americans and saving lives, we urge you to affirm.
Alright, Crossfire, do you want to stand or sit?
Judge, do you have a preference?
No, I don't.
Okay, we can sit then, I guess.
That's good.
You can have the first. Oh, wait, we can have water.
Yeah, sure. Whatever you need.
Start.
Good?
Yeah.
Awesome. Alright, so let's start off, right?
Sure.
So, in California, you say that there's only half the displacement, right? But why?
Okay, so we're telling you that right now California is facing like a house shortage, right?
Sure. But, I mean, isn't that all of America?
Okay, yeah, in urban areas specifically, right? So we're
Sure.
telling you that once you promote market rate housing, you have like, people are able to build more houses, therefore decreasing like.
Wait, why are people just able to build more houses? Like, couldn't
Okay.
a builder build a house if he
So-
wanted to?
No, so right now you've seen the status quo. In places with rent controls, you can't just go to any land and build there, right?
But why not?
Okay, zoning laws, right? Market rate housing also deregulates, which means that they don't have the same zoning laws as rent controls.
So why
do.
can't we just follow the zoning laws?
They're not part of market rate housing, right?
Sure,
So-
but why does that matter?
Okay, market rate housing allows for the deregulation, which then also results in like removing all these zoning laws so that developers can go and build and expand on more land, which doesn't happen on your world. May I have a question?
Gotcha. Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Why is there a labor shortage right now?
Because they're unfilled, and that means there's a labor shortage because people aren't filling in the jobs for these construction companies.
Okay, sure. You can have a question.
Thanks. All right. So, how about we go back up to supply increasing, all right?
Sure.
So, does building these places or apartments cost less? Is that what you're saying,
Okay,
right?
so we're saying that like right now, you can't access this land, right? And we would say that even though in
Wait,
like,
no, but like outside of that land in general, right? For places where you can build it,
yeah,
is it going to cost less to build it?
I would say yeah, it would cost less.
Says who though? Or is it
It's
just
like
analysis?
zoning. It's like zoning regulations, right?
And then-
I would say that
Yeah,
like
sure. But
you
then you
can't-
also bring up like the luxury homes, right? Did someone specifically say that we have an excess, or was that analysis?
it's okay. So we have a couple of examples, right? Like we have cards that state like Miami, New York. They all have like an excess of like luxury homes.
They do?
Yeah, we can
Then-
show you the card if you want.
But is it just a couple of cities, or is it a lot of places?
I mean, we would say we have a card for like quite a few of the cities that don't have like anyone living in those like luxury homes. Therefore,
Wait, so
we would
people
say-
build them for nothing?
No, okay, so like you see like investors, they're always trying to like build more houses, but the problem with that is that right now there's no market rate housing, so they're always going to continue to build luxury housing. But in our world, once you promote market rate housing, you're going to have landowners switch over,
Wait.
developers switch over to a new thing.
Well,
Can I have a question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Why is subsidizing the only way to promote market rate housing?
Wait, what?
So your first link, right?
It's cutting subsidies, not making
Yeah,
subsidies
yeah,
for
so why is
promotion.
that the only way to promote market rate
Because
housing?
that's what Congress said it wanted to do. That they,
I'm
like,
gonna
if
call
that,
for that card, and also like,
sure.
why, like, there's other ways you can promote market rate housing, right?
guess
This
so,
debate
yeah.
is over whether or not it should be promoted, not like how we're gonna promote
Yeah,
it.
you could.
Okay, sure, you can have a question.
Alright, thanks, well, we only have 3 seconds left, so how's your day?
I'm good, how are you?
Awesome, I'm pretty good too.
Can I see the,
The
Sure.
card that we wanted?
thanks. And do
Yeah.
you wanna bring it over, or?
Yeah, I can bring it over, give me a sec.
I got it in front of me. if you
Alright,
want.
sure, sounds good.
Alright.
We'll start prep when
It's the Pinto of American Enterprise Institute, top blue.
Wait, can I see the article, please?
Sure.
Sorry.
you just wanna see like the content.
You're not forgiven, but sure.
Okay.
I can live with that.
Yeah, here's the floor.
Where's the highlighted part? Yeah.
Oh, I have 1%. Really, can you hold on?
I have like 10%.
You guys need a charger?
We have a
I have
charger,
one,
I just
thank
don't
you.
wanna move
Gotcha.
the charger. The charge 9 if we use one.
It really is just like, it's this whole paragraph and then down below after that too.
Oh. Wait, but like.
Where does it mention Congress?
Down below.
Okay, thank you.
You are welcome. Are you guys gonna still be running? Are you guys good?
It's yours.
Right. I'm blanking out, sorry, because you guys asked for evidence, I was
Good.
thinking,
Good
Tim,
girl.
is this your first turn?
Yeah, you should use
you running prep? Okay, we're good.
Is it alright if I don't use the stand?
Yeah, go ahead.
Go
I don't
ahead,
really
it's
like
there
it.
if you wanna use it.
It's kinda scary.
I have 10%.
Ready? Opponents?
Yeah.
What about you, Tim?
Momento. Sorry. Alright.
Thank you, Tim, very cool. And Beacon. I'm gonna start off. I concede to Business Insider, I concede to Huffington Post, I concede to the NLIHS. Do you know what they all say? They all say that there's a housing crisis. Of course there's a housing crisis, but they don't actually solve. We actually solve. Let me explain why. Let's first start at their case. The top of their case, they move down, they talk about this low supply, and they need to increase the supply in order to allow this to help solve for itself. But that's not actually happening. They claim that the market rate housing is going to. Actually, no, move down. The Badger card says that the decrease of prices is with supply and demand equaling out. But this is not an addition or subtraction equation. This is a lot more like multiplication and division. What actually happens is not all houses are built the same. If you look, literally drive down any street, no house is built exactly the same. And because of that reason, you have to look at specific instances where houses were built and how this affected the people, how this affected the population. I'm going to show you that it was really, really bad. But let's move on. They're telling you that this that they're going to build all of this on open land, right? But there's no such a thing as open land in urban areas because urban areas are so cram-packed. This is logical because if you look at cities like San Francisco, New York, Seattle, even Austin, Texas, there's a lot of no land there. So instead what they're going to be doing is you can look and cross-apply that to our case where we're telling you is that they're going to gentrify these areas by these wealthier individuals moving into these poorer income areas and then forcing them out. This displaces them, and this displacement is really, really bad because what happens is then they can't access the jobs that are more available in the city, and then that puts them at greater risk of health issues, economic, and educational deficiency. So then if we move on, you look at their first impact talking about how this increases low-income housing. No, because what's happening here is that the only people that can what's actually going to happen is when they have this market rate housing, it doesn't actually trickle down to the poor individuals. What happens is according to Hertz, what he claims is that it takes 50 years for this to occur where the housing actually goes down to poor individuals. And in the end, it doesn't even necessarily go down to poor individuals because he concludes that a majority of it actually knocks back up. So richer individuals are actually purchasing houses from either middle class or other richer individuals. It's not actually trickling down to poorer people, and they're not actually gaining any offense off of that impact. But if we move on, they give a specific instance where Senator Scott of California basically says that we need more houses. Yes, you need more houses, but market rate housing is not the way to solve. The reason for this is because if we look at his own state and his own city, San Francisco. In San Francisco, what happened was they built 90,000 houses, but while the median income actually increased about 40%, the actual rent costs and housing costs increased by, get this, 398%. It is not affordable when we have market rate housing in any city, and San Francisco is the staple of that. And that further proves that there is no way that market rate housing is going to actually hit down to the poor. It actually is only benefiting the rich. Cross-apply this to our case where we're showing you that if we actually allow for market rate housing, it's going to push poor people out of places where they have better opportunities, and it pushes them away from the jobs, which actually hurts people. And if we look at this, let's go ahead and do an underview. The underview here is basically we have to help the most amount of poor individuals because they're actually what help bolster America. Because what's happening here is in their world, they don't actually help any of poor individuals, and poor individuals is what actually results in the most important because they get the most negative effects from what happens from any of the negative impacts that happen from either gentrification or market rate housing or having restrictions anyway. And if you look and cross-apply their entire case with one card in our case, Rice 09. Rice 09 said that because of all these subsidies, it lifted 4 million people out of poverty, and if we eliminate these subsidies, which is what market rate housing does, it pushes 5 million people into poverty. This is really bad because we can show you that through this offense, they're the one who's actually pushing more people into poverty where we are saving people. That's why you can't fix what's not broke.
Yeah, it's broken.
Everyone have.
Oh wait, can I have a call for a card quickly?
Sure.
There's no open land.
Or was that just y'all's analysis?
No, that's what you said in your case.
Wait, we said we have open land.
Why
The
would
one that
we-
you said that it's jam-packed and like there's no
There's no open land.
Or was that just analysis?
I guess I misunderstood what you said because I flowed that as if you said that there was a limited amount of land.
Wait, there is a limit with zoning regulations and then you said there were urban areas with jam-packed. Okay,
It is.
How many seconds did you use?
11, plus like 18 before for the cards. Thanks, Tim.
You're welcome.
Okay, first we're gonna start with an overview on their side, down the case, and then basically responding to what we said. Okay, is everyone ready? All right. Starting off in an overview, first of all, gentrification isn't going to happen as long as prices decrease. In fact, supply and demand laws dictate that supply, no matter what kind of supply, decreases prices. The more supply you have, the demand gets lower, and so do the prices. But second, affordable housing is going to be made. This is true due to the fact that in the status quo, the limits for construction are currently decreasing the amount of affordable housing, which is what Badger 19 tells you. However, deregulation through promoting market rate housing allows for developers to actually start building more, thus increasing the amount of affordable land. But now down their case. First of all, in their subpoint A on subsidizing. First, realize that this is not the only way to promote market rate housing. They tell you that this is what Congress wants, but call for their card, it specifically says that Congress should. It's an opinionated piece. It doesn't say that Congress wants to or that Congress will. So that takes out their link completely. But second, on gentrification, a couple responses here. First, delink it, because we tell you that affordable housing is going to be built. This is due to the fact that right now, the zoning laws restrict the amount of luxury housing made. The second you switch over to market rate housing and affirm the resolution, you're going to see these zoning laws go away, which allows investors to cater to a new market, which is the affordable housing. They misinterpret it by making it seem like we're running filtering, as in the houses are going to suddenly deteriorate. That's not what we're running. We're running the fact that developers are going to start building affordable housing in the first place. But then, second, on gentrification, Freeman O'Fine found in a study that the probability that a household would be displaced in a gentrified neighborhood was a mere 1.3%. So even if you buy the fact that luxury houses are going to be built, even though they aren't, look to that. But third, crime rates decrease, which is a big turn. But fourth, developers can build up, not out. But fifth, look to the fact that ISP explains in 2013 that only 1% of poor renters live in rent-controlled areas. That means that even if gentrification is going to occur, it's not going to affect that many people. But then, lastly, all of it's mitigated if we just build affordable housing, which is what the pro is strongly advocating for. Now let's go into lack of workforce. They never proved that their side solves for the workforce. Realize that in both situations, you're going to see building happening, whether it's going to be through more luxury housing or other ways. But at least in the pro world, you're going to be building affordable housing. We would contest the fact that the labor shortage doesn't get better in any world, but you're in fact going to cause a trickle-down effect. The second you take out more homeless people and put them into houses, give them social mobility, that's when you're going to see these construction jobs being filled, and you're actually going to see an increase in solvency for the shortage through trickle down. But now onto the app side. First of all, they tell us that there's not an unlimited amount of land and there's a jam-packed area, but NY Times tells you that there is 30% land left near bare areas. So that 30% is currently being restricted by zoning regulations. The second you affirm, you get rid of these zoning regulations, open up that 30% and incentivize affordable housing. But then they tell you that if housing doesn't go down to poor individuals and the trickle-down effect doesn't work. Again, the pro side is not advocating for trickle-down. All we're saying is that developers are going to be incentivized to capitalize the amount of land they have by catering to a new market. You can see this because right now in places like Miami, New York, San Francisco, there is a surplus of luxury housing. That means that the demand is slowly being met, and the investors aren't going to gain more profit if they continue to build luxury housing on this open land. So you can be rest assured that they're going to switch over to affordable housing. That's where you vote pro. But then they tell you that housing increased 398% in San Francisco. But realize that San Francisco doesn't have market rate housing, therefore builders aren't incentivized to build affordable housing. And thus, we would contend that on their underview, we concede to their underview, like yes, the poor should be helped, and that's going to be happened when you vote pro, when you vote for market rate housing in the implementation. All right. Justin, you can take first question.
All right, give me a second.
All right.
Let's begin. All right, so how's your day today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Would you say the weather's pretty nice?
Yeah, I think it's a little cold outside though.
I'd say so. So let's get into the meat and potatoes. First off, let me ask, why necessarily is rent going to be going down?
All right, so this is what we tell you in two ways. First, we would contend the fact that affordable homes are going to be built. And the second that affordable homes are going to be built, you're gonna see this new, you're gonna see the impoverished and the poor right now get access to these homes because they're affordable. And
Okay,
secondly, just the second part.
All right, get
really
right
quick.
into it.
Even if we would agree the fact that luxury homes are going to be built, but they won't, the overall supply of luxury homes is going to increase, which then overall decreases the prices. Can I take a question?
Let me just take a couple more because
Yeah,
you said
sure.
a lot there. First, in regards to necessarily they're going to be building more affordable housing, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Which companies have said they'd be willing to do this?
All right, so this is what we're telling you. Since market rate housing hasn't happened yet, we can't.
Actually,
attest-
it has in
Oh,
many
I mean, like
areas.
on a national scale, right? So what we're saying is that, like giving another example to another way we could promote market rate housing is through things like tax incentives and breaks, right? Which then we can do that as a government to ultimately incentivize like them to build affordable homes, but also it just makes sense for them to do that. Can I take a question?
Sure, why not?
Okay, so you tell me that gentrification is going to happen, right?
Yes.
And that like there's a ripple effect. So how
Yes.
exactly if investors and builders don't build luxury homes, how exactly is gentrification going to play out?
No, you're getting this wrong. They are going to be building. It's not necessarily luxury homes, but it's going to be higher income individuals. The whole idea of
Wait.
gentrification,
Okay, so let's just like quickly define luxury as middle class and up.
that's, no.
I mean, that's what
I
luxury
would
is.
consider myself middle class and I don't have a luxury
Wait,
home.
luxury home, if you like Google it, it means middle class and up. If you look at luxury homes, like we all live in
I think we
luxury
should
homes.
get a little more specific. Let's just say like middle income class homes and then luxury homes for a higher income class. So we can be more specific. Because
Sure.
this has been getting muddled in every round that I've been in. So let's be a little more specific.
Sure,
So,
I just define it as middle class and up, but sure, if you want to get more specific.
yeah,
than
so
that,
if we
that's
look specifically, it's not necessarily upper in class homes that are being built,
Wait.
luxury homes, but it can also be middle income class homes
Wait,
that are
we
still
would
going to be
contest
built
the
in the
fact
gentrified
that,
areas.
like, the impoverished and the poor are the people who need the help, not the middle class.
Right, and I get that. That's my interview.
Yeah. So okay, do you have a question?
Well, okay, so let's stick to that.
Okay.
How do you respond to like somewhere where, let's say they build houses specifically for lower income class people,
So
and it didn't
we
work
would-
like San Francisco?
Okay, so we would say that since San Francisco doesn't have market rate housing, you can't make that a viable.
Well, what they actually did was of those 90,000, about 10% of it was actually for lower income people, but
So
it's still
how
increased
exactly
the
is your
price.
warrant behind the fact that the price went up? Because then,
The idea is that the housing market, it didn't cope with the market, the housing that it was the housing problem that it was happening, and what happened was it actually increased the
But
price of
why?
the houses.
that's time anyways. Can I see your card on, sorry for the card questions, but can I see your card on San Francisco?
Yeah.
Alright, just bring it over.
Low-key don't know anything else from the, oh, never mind, found it. Alright, I'll just take that after you're done.
Thank you.
Full stop.
Okay. That's just 12.
How many seconds used?
Oh, right, wait, are you guys taking cards? Or,
No.
oh, okay, sorry.
How much prep did you use? Like 10 seconds?
11, yeah. That's like 18 plus 11 plus 11. You can do that.
I'll be going down their case, or like their arguments, then back to mine. Opponents? Justin? Judge? Audience? Awesome. Time starts now. Very last CX, she said something very important, right? She said incentives, right? But where do you get the money for incentives from? Exactly there. Subsidies and programs. That's where Pintos tells you, right? That point, that's why we're showing you subsidies are going down, and that's the problem, right? You're going to be getting rid of the program that's been saving over 4 million people from poverty. That's 200 IQ plays. You don't want to do it because the programs are very important. But then, moving on, right? They tell you that all of a sudden there's like 30% of open space in New York. It's kind of like odd flex, but okay. But like the problem is, you need regulations for things, right? Because regulations are there for a reason. Like there's a reason why I can't just jaywalk across the street, it's because it's for my safety. So I would assume the reason why there's like zoning and stuff is because, boom, if you build things, things go out of population, and then there's all of a sudden a bunch of people who are there but don't have jobs and everything. So that's why you have regulation, because the government put them there for a reason. But then, let's move to Hertz, right? Hertz tells you that The problem is there's been like it takes a bunch of time for things to actually lower or go and move around, and the rent doesn't actually decrease. Because look, what they're trying to tell you is that, 1 plus 1 is somehow equal to 30. San Francisco tells you 1 plus 1 equals 2, right? Because in San Francisco, when they increased the units by 90,000 units, their income still went up by 40%, but rent went up by 400%. That doesn't make sense. That is a clear indication that shows you, boom, it doesn't work. 1 plus 1 does not equal to 3. But then, let's move back onto my case, right? The builders, we show you there's just not enough of them. It's like telling your child, I want you to build 1 Eiffel Tower. But then in their world, you're saying, now please build me 100 Eiffel Towers when there's only you, because there's just no jobs. There's no people to fill in for these jobs. So that's what we do. They tell you there's no status quo that solves for anything, but Thorsby tells you that we do solve because there's less active buyers. You're the one who's telling your child, you only need to build me 1 Eiffel Tower instead of 100, and therefore, boom, that's where it solves back for the status quo, because then the workers are no longer overworked, they're no longer going to be overhyped, and therefore, the prices will go down. For these reasons and more, please vote con. Sure.
I have 50 seconds used.
Yeah,
so that's good. You have like 20 seconds left.
Just
Cool beans.
summer is just gonna be Cod Pro. Good. And then voters. Firstly, let's start off with some things that they talked about like in their summary. They try to tell you that like subsidies are the only way to go. However, as my partner argued, that they can also give incentives to people to provide like jobs and stuff to get affordable housing. This is really important because their card that says that the only way to promote market rate housing says that Congress should. It does not say that that's the only way. Therefore, and then they completely drop like the fact that we can do it in other ways. Then in their card, like San Francisco, this is really important. Their card about San Francisco, the reason that the prices went so high, they give you like this really high percentage. The reason that the prices went so high, it was because 77% of the homes that were built were actually upper class luxury homes. This is extremely problematic because A, San Francisco doesn't have market rate housing, therefore you cannot count as an example, but B, also their studies actually has 77% of housing in it. But then they try to tell you that it takes time to lower price. However, we're telling you that once you increase supply, demand automatically goes down to the point where prices are also cheaper. Gentrification, displacement is not going to happen because when you have more houses, you're going to increase the amount of people getting affordable housing. But then they try to tell you that like deregulation, there's like regulation laws in place. However, we would argue that right now these regulations are in place because of rent controls. However, once you remove rent controls and you promote market rate housing on a national scale, you have people building in these areas, which is extremely crucial. But now let's move on to some weighing. In their world, all you get is the continuation of this important housing crisis where thousands of people are left homeless and without jobs. However, in our world, once you promote market rate housing, you have people getting access to housing, you have people getting access to jobs, you have poverty going down, you have people living in a world where houses are generally cheaper, and you have people where property values don't go up. Therefore, vote pro.
Cool. Alright. We're ready for your GCX whenever you guys are.
Sure.
Let's start a timer.
Yep.
There we go.
Can I take the first question really quick?
Sure, go ahead, why not?
How's state been going for you?
It's rough.
Decent, it's okay.
I went to bed at 3 in the morning, Thursday morning, because I was prepping.
Yeah.
It's rough that I'm not going to break,
You
but
can
whatever.
think about
Yeah.
I mean, we're here to have fun, right?
So, you talk about incentives, right?
Mhm.
So where are we gonna get incentives from? Because
Right,
you need the
so
money
this
to,
is what
for
like,
incentives,
this
right?
is what I wanted to clear up really quick, right?
Sure.
Even if we have to cut down subsidies to give these incentives, providing the affordable homes clearly outweighs.
Wait,
Because
wait,
let
wait,
me
wait,
let me
sure.
finish really quick.
Sure.
So in order to get people off the reliance of subsidies, right, you have to get them out of poverty.
Okay.
And we would
Okay,
contend that giving them affordable
Okay,
homes
you
is
go.
the way to do it.
Alright, so you're trying to weigh that it's better. So you do concede the link though, right? 'Cause
Yes.
Alright, cool.
Sure.
Alright.
You can have a question.
Again?
Oh, sure,
Alright,
we can
thank
take a
you.
question, never mind.
Alright, sure, yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Alright, so specifically you tell me that like people, like there's safety issues, right? So isn't there
With
safety
regulation.
issues with poverty?
Yeah, but there's also safety issues with like a bunch of construction everywhere, right? Because I wouldn't want like
Can I-
some
But,
random
But like once the
thing.
construction
Can I
is
give
done, like then like,
I mean,
can you give an
construction-
example of how
I mean,
construction
okay,
has
so
like?
let me ask you the real
Because
question,
normally
right? So
construction's
why are
expensive.
regulations there?
We
Like
would
what
say
do these
for rent
do?
controls, or like for the prices, for the people.
Right, so
But
that,
they don't
so
really
that the
help.
people who own it don't just like
So,
go
like-
bankrupt, right?
Yeah.
Let's
it's
take
not
an
really
example of
safety
this
then.
like electricity company, I forgot the name, right? But when there was regulation on it, the prices were higher. But when the deregulation happened, there was no really like safety issue, all that
I mean,
happened were the
but-
prices decreased.
I mean, then again, we have regulations for like our labor workers in here. That's why we have all this insurance and stuff. Well, in China, there isn't all these regulations, and that's where we get a bunch of like child workers and everything.
Wait, so you're saying that by promoting market
just
rate
saying
housing, we're gonna
regulations are
get
good.
child workers?
I'm saying regulations are good. It was just an analysis.
Alright,
Yeah.
you want a question?
Yes,
Yeah.
real quick. How many people do you give houses for in a
We
market
can't,
rate house?
since
You can't
since the
quantify
app
it.
is the future, we can't quantify that.
Not
Can I take a
necess-
question?
I mean, it is not necessarily the future. There's small, suburban areas that
Yeah,
have
but the
this
top,
where it's
okay, wait,
easily
first
comparable,
topic
right?
is like urban areas. Second of all, we would say that you can't really quantify that because the areas where market rate housing has been promoted in the United States, like small pockets like of cities or whatever. So you can't really like quantify how many houses you can build.
But you
We're just
can
saying-
do research from those, can't you? Like in general. Like even if it's not nationwide, it's still something, right?
Do you have any like city
Okay.
examples specifically
Can I have a
where
question to that?
Wait, so we would contend the fact that since we're providing tax incentives through for developers to like build affordable housing, then we would say that since none of that has happened yet, the national scale is very different from the state
Well,
scale. So we would say like logically like we don't have those numbers since after.
Can I have another question?
I would
Can we take a
contend that market rate housing implies that there's no more regulations and no more incentives.
Alright,
You can
that's
go.
fine. And
I mean,
that's
there's
fine.
like 5 seconds left.
Wait, we have 3 minutes now.
Are you
Oh, really?
hungry? Oh,
I mean,
are you
yeah.
hungry?
A little
me
bit.
too. Did you
Alright.
get lunch?
How are you?
No, actually.
I did not.
Alright.
The food trucks are pretty good though. Yeah.
How much prep do you want?
2 minutes.
We'll take it.
All 2 minutes, yes.
I will be addressing a main issue in today's debate. I will then weigh and tell you why you should be negating today's debate. I'm sorry, I'm tired. Remember the tagline of our contention 1, destroying the market. That is the affirmative side's main goal. At the end of the day, they are destroying the market by allowing for the market rate housing to take over. Because what happens is, if you look in our case, we give you all these examples from gentrification to lack of workforce to straining construction companies. This is really bad. We give you all these examples and we tell you the impact is drastic. Because what happens here is it causes all of these people to be put out of work and we don't have enough and we strain all of our resources so we won't be able to build the housing. At the end of the day, the hype lies in the negating side because we allow for it to solve. We can extend Thorsby across the flow cleanly because they don't attack it. Thorsby concludes that the status quo can actually help solve for itself. Now necessarily, he also says that it doesn't necessarily solve for all homelessness. But what happens is, you can also link that to what Rice 09 says, where Rice is saying that 4 million people, 4 million have been lifted out of poverty because of subsidies. But if you advocate for market rate housing, which is what the affirmative side wants, they eliminate these subsidies so that these people can no longer afford houses. But they're trying to tell you that they're going to have these incentives. But you can yeet that out the window because incentives don't exist, because market rate housing implies that you eliminate all government interaction. At the end of the day, they don't gain any offense because they eliminate their own link by affirming the resolution. That's why you'd be voting for us in today's debate, because we show you that in the status quo, we can solve, and you don't want to fix what ain't broke. And at the end of the day, we solve for this, and we give you that clarity of link, and we give you specific information. We tell you of cities where market rate housing hasn't worked, and they tell you, for example, our specific example of San Francisco, where they tried to attack, which was a big issue in today's debate. They attacked it saying that, 70% of this housing was luxury homes. That's not necessarily what it said. It just said that 20% specifically went to poorer income individuals. It doesn't say that 70% was a luxury home. And at the end of the day, that 20% matters because that 20% accounts for that almost 300% increase in the rental cost for the poorer individuals. So then these people can't afford the housing. They're not giving any housing to poor and lower income individuals, whereas they're just only helping the rich. That's why you're voting for the negating side in today's debate, because we actually solve in the status quo.
I loved the meme references, by the way.
What meme reference?
Oh, of course.
Oh yeah.
Judge, ready? Guys, ready?
We're good.
We will. Alright. The con tries to come up here today and give you a couple of voters. First, they talk about subsidies. Realize that the pro team is advocating for removing the reliance on subsidies altogether. What you're doing when you give the impoverished homes is you're allowing them to get off the cycle of poverty for them not to need subsidies in the first place. I would contend that giving them homes is better than giving them subsidies because you allow them to stand on their own 2 feet, you allow them to get jobs, and that's been cleanly extended and dropped by the con throughout this round. But then they try to give you this example about how San Francisco. Realize you can call for the card itself. It specifically says that 77% of those homes were built for the higher income. That explains the rent increase, because if 77% were built for the higher income, then obviously the rent is going to go up because the prices on those homes are much larger. But even then, let's go on to safety, even though it was dropped in final focus. Places like Houston have market rate housing, and there's no decrease in safety or anything like that. We would contend that these regulations only restrict the amount of land that people can build on. Now let's go on to our case. The sole way that the pro wins today's round is through affordable housing. None of the links go contested throughout the round when we specifically tell you that the second to affirm, you open up land and allow the caterants to affordable housing. That's really important to realize, because you're giving these people homes, you're lifting them out of poverty. They tell you that the status quo solves for itself, but if the status quo solved for itself, A, there wouldn't be a housing shortage, B, there would be some sort of warrant behind their card, which there isn't. But now going on to gentrification. Again, when you don't build luxury homes, gentrification doesn't happen. All you're doing when you vote pro is you're increasing the amount of people we can lift out of poverty, you're decreasing segregation, an impact that goes dropped, and also you're starting towards a change. You're making towards a policy that can end the shorting crisis. Then on labor, first of all, they never prove how they solve. That's a firm.
I'd rather feel your
Thank you for judging state finals.
Judging.
Yes, thank you for judging state finals between two great
Clements,
teams.
GN.
Clements, GN, Strake, NH, yeah? NH.
It's 5-0 for Melbourne.
I mean,